This is part 8 of She Prayed Over My Mama. Now, prior to that phone call, I received regarding the strokes, informed me of the strokes that my mother suffered. My mother did send over to me what I would call an estimate that was put together, in my belief, by the evangelist Kim and her deacon husband Walter from the church. I believe it was put together for my benefit, to appease me, because I kept insisting on getting something in writing. And I will put that up there so you can see what they had my 78-year-old mother signed. Now, what I put up there is what was sent to my mother. I have, so that you know, I have redacted the original parties' names in there, because, as I've stated previously, I have changed the names for the purposes of retelling these events. So when I received this estimate, which is clearly labeled an estimate, I had, of course, had many concerns about it. And I brought it to my mom, and I said, "Mom, this is not right." I said, what is this? I said, again, how much money did you give them? And she was like, "Rand, don't you see? Look there on the contract. It says, your price, our price, and your price. Do you see how much money they saving me?" And I'm like, "Mom, anybody could type this up. Anybody could type this stuff up." I said, "This means nothing." I said, "Who is the contractor on this?" Because mind you, as I stated before, the construction crew that was doing the work, or had been doing work previously on my mother's bathroom that I talked about in episode 4, was also the same people from her church. And again, that was the deacon Walter, Kim's husband. There was Stephen, who owned the construction company. There was also an associate minister from, again, this same church, who we'll refer to as Reverend Lowe. Now, so I don't have to keep referring to these persons' names and their positions within the church each time I mention them or talk about these individuals. I have decided to refer to them hereinafter as the Holy Construction Crew. I mean it in the most facetious, cynical, and sarcastic way when I say the Holy Construction Crew. One thing I want to really point out from this estimate that you can see here is the dates. My mother signed it and dated it February 3rd of 24 first. Then there was a line that was crossed out, and the new date was January 29th of 2024. February 3rd of 24 is when I had the call with my mother, and it was a day after I sent my sister and brother-in-law to inspect the premises. That's when they saw the Holy Construction Crew working on my mother's home. So now what you will also find on this document, that's what's missing on this document, is a licensed contractor. So again, Stephen didn't put his company on this estimate, even though there is evidence that he and his company were there doing the work. The only person's name other than my mother's name, Lucilia Banks, who was on this estimate, was the evangelist's husband, the Deacon Walter. He identified himself on this estimate as the project manager. I was trying to tell my mother, if everything is on the up and up, and the construction company, Stephen's construction company, was doing the work, they should have put their names in there as well. Now, I believe, my theory, they did this quite purposely to insulate themselves should there be a problem down the line. Now, it's important you take note. The total amount on this estimate says, if you add it up, $40,000. Something to keep in mind. when I got the phone call regarding my mother's strokes and subsequent strokes, it was mid-April. And up to that point, I believe that they had started the work on or about possibly January 29th. And they still had slow walked the remodel. And there wasn't significant progress that was done on my mother's house. As soon as I flew into town, I went straight to the hospital to be with my mother, and she was in the neuro ICU. I wanted to be there by her side. When she had the initial stroke, she was fine. As I said previously, she was fine. So she had already made arrangements for the church construction people to come in and continue working while she was in the hospital. Because at this time, her diagnosis was a good outlook that she would just be there for approximately a week, do rehab, and be discharged. It was only later that that diagnosis became grim. Now, another thing that also concerned me about this is, after speaking to my mom and my sisters and our past experience, this construction crew never seemed to really work a full day. It would always be, to come in, do some work a few hours, and then they had to go. Now, by the time my mom had her second stroke, the word regarding her health or her condition seemed to spread throughout the church. And at that time, I was really very protective and guarded about my mother's status. I knew the evangelist, Kim, had spearheaded this holy construction crew and had gotten this money from my mom. And my main concern is, once they knew my mother's status, they'd stop working. And during this time, Kim had called my phone several times, leaving messages trying to check in on the status of my mom. And for a moment, I ignored them. But as the third stroke and the neurosurgeons, and told us, the grim diagnosis, my position softened. I started to encourage people to come see my mom. I called Kim and told her she could come see my mom. I thought it was good for my mom to be able to hear that people were coming to see her. I wanted my mom to at least recognize people's voices. And after a while, there were several of the church members that came to see her, including the pastor of the church and the first lady. And shortly after, I found out the true relationship between the pastor, the deacon, and the evangelist.